Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe. This is a one-on-one interview. I'm joined by Dharmesh Sheth of Sky Sports News. Of course, you're back again, Dharmesh. It's been another week. We are, 9 days into the January transfer window. What is the latest with Manchester United? Sir Jim Ratcliffe is in. What are his priorities? Why hasn't anything happened? Where are all the transfers? What is going on?
You could be asking me that same question this time next week, unfortunately, Joe. But thanks for having me back on. With regard to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, we're still waiting for the official ratification from the Premier League that 25% minority stake is done and dusted. Not foreseeing any problems in that. But with regard to what his priorities will be, you can almost split them off the pitch and on the pitch. Off the pitch, they'll be looking at the infrastructure of the football club first and foremost. We're talking about that leak at Old Trafford, the famous leaky Old Trafford. They're going to be hopefully trying to fix that. They'll be looking at any improvements they can make to the training ground as well, but also off the pitch, and probably most importantly, the recruitment side of the football club, the director of football. Will they be recruiting someone or some people in those areas as soon as they have got their feet under the table? With regard to what they want to do on the pitch, well, I think it's pretty clear. They want to assess the whole of the playing squad. They want to assess the coaching staff. They want to assess the manager. That's very, very likely to happen on a bigger scale come the summer, when United will know what the budgets are and what kind of deals they'll be able to do and what players they think will be taking them forward on, and which players they'll think, actually, thanks for your service, but we're going to move you on now. So lots and lots to do for Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos. And if you think about it, particularly on the pitch and the recruitment side, it's almost not just looking at what happened in the last year and whether the recruitment's been good. It's effectively the last 10 years. Because if you think about what the Glazers have done, they've effectively handed over the football operations to Ineos, which in a way, if you read between the lines, is an admission of failure on the football side from the Glazers. So on that point, if you think about how long the Glazers have been there, 15 odd years, if they're now giving all of the football operations to someone who's got a 25% minority stake in the club, then in a way you could say that's an admission that they've got it wrong so far.
And I think, Ratcliffe, without sort of criticising the Glazers explicitly, has almost said that, hasn't he? We've seen him say, things on the pitch haven't been where they want them to be. We want to get it back there, which is obviously, anyone can see that. But even the new sort of business partner of the Glazers can't be as sort of friendly with his mates or, with his business partners to deny what we've all seen on the pitch, which is good to see at least. Like you said, it's not been officially ratified yet, but it's been sort of well spoken that things have to pass through Ineos before decisions can be made. Do you think we can start to see some changes soon? We've already seen, I think it was at the game against Wigan last night, we saw Dave Brailsford, who's been, doing having conversations with the staff at Old Trafford. We've seen Jean-Claude Blanc as well, who doesn't have an official role, I don't think, at Manchester United, hasn't been hired in an official capacity. He was at the game last night. Obviously, all these people are working on this project. They've kind of snuck in through the sort of Ineos banner. Do you think we will see some immediate changes in terms of personnel? And we'll get on to sort of sporting directors in a minute, but even above that, what do we know the roles of these people yet? What is actually going on? Because Dave Brailsford just arrived, but does he have a role? Does he have a title? What is going on here?
Not entirely yet, simply because that probably won't get formally announced, what kind of roles people have got, until you've got this official ratification from the Premier League. But the fact that, we've seen Sir Jim Ratcliffe photographed with Eric Ten Hag. He's been to the training ground. He's met them. Eric Ten Hag has spoken about their meeting. You mentioned Sir Dave Brailsford being at the games in recent memory. That would suggest that they don't see any issues with this deal going through. So, they are getting their feet under the table already, if not officially. Yeah. But if you look at what's happened so far in this transfer window, there was a news conference with Eric Ten Hag, Hannibal Mejbri, Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Victor Lindelof. Manchester United have triggered the options in all three players' contracts, and they're having talks with Raphael Varane and Anthony Martial. They haven't triggered the options in those two contracts. Yeah. That would mean that Ineos will have already had a say in which contracts are getting triggered, which ones aren't, which players of those 5 they want to keep, and which they're having talks with to potentially extend a contract. I mean, the information I have, just as a quick aside, there was a little bit of confusion, wasn't there, last week when Eric Ten Hag said that those 3 players have had their options triggered, but there's talks with the other 2. Yep. And people jumped on it by saying, well, are they extending Anthony Martial's contract? I don't think that would be the case. I mean, you can't ever rule something like that out. But what I think is happening there is they don't want to extend the option to Varane and Martial on the current terms. The information we have is that they want to speak to Raphael Varane about extending a contract on reduced terms and giving him an extended contract at United. I don't think, as it stands, that's the case with Anthony Martial. And we think that if offers were to come in January, then they would be considered. So that's where I think the situation is. But it just highlights the fact that some of these decisions are being made in January, and we know that Ineos have to be consulted before big decisions are made. And so that would immediately imply that they will have had a say in these contracts already. So even though, as I keep saying, it hasn't been officially ratified, they are still in the decision-making process.
This show is sponsored by no other than Manscaped. It's not a bird, it's not a plane, it is Manscaped working around the clock to bring you the latest and greatest formulations and products so you can look after what is going on downstairs. They've been working, like I said, round the clock to bring you the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, featuring the new jewel in the crown, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. And you think, well, how could you even improve on the 4.0? Well, what, 2 interchangeable heads? One, a sort of slightly larger clipping blade to take the trim down, to take the weeds down a little bit. And then we've got the foil blade, so you can go as close as you want, wherever you want. And it's not just that. In the Performance Package, you also get the Weed Whacker 2.0 as well. Both of them feature Manscaped's skin-safe technology, so you don't have to worry about things getting caught and nicked and snags and all that bad stuff that no one wants, blood dripping down your leg after you're going on your first date. You don't have to worry about that with Manscaped. And it's not just the trimmers in the Manscaped Performance Package bundle. You also get their liquid formulations, the Crop Soother Aftershave Lotion, the Crop Preserver Anti-Chafe Ball Deodorant, yeah? It's that simple. Once they touch your sack, you will never go back. Manscaped even threw in 2 free gifts in the Performance Package 5.0, the Manscaped Boxers 2.0, there you go, and the Shed 2.0 travel bag. Bring your travel and comfort game to another level. Manscaped are absolutely fantastic. Genuinely, I use them every single time I trim anything from here down. It's Manscaped all the way. And actually, the nose is Manscaped as well. Make sure you use the code DEVILS20 to get 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Again, DEVILS20 for 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Millions and millions and millions of men trust Manscaped, and you should too. Again, check them out. Use the code DEVILS20 at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. Your balls will thank you. Moving on slightly, because obviously we've seen the sort of the bigger boys, the top CEOs and this, that and the other. But sort of below that is a potential restructuring as well. Obviously, we've got John Murtaugh in this sort of technical football director role. I can't ever remember which one's him and which one's Darren Fletcher, but, some sort of director as it stands. There's been talk of a sporting director come in. There's been talk of even maybe adding another layer in there as well, because I think at one point it was a lot of mention of people like Paul Mitchell and people who've done the sort of more recruitment side of the sporting director role, and then people like Dan Ashworth as well in there, who are sort of more kind of in tune with the businessy side of the footballing end of the spectrum, if you know what I mean. And then there was reports that United might want 2 people, a sporting director and a head of recruitment. Do we know what the latest is with that? Names like Ashworth, Mitchell, Dougie Freedman is another one that's been mentioned as well. Do you know who United are looking at and whether it's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 of this sort of restructuring? Do we know what's going on there?
Yeah, we keep hearing this phrase, don't we? Marginal gains.
Yeah.
With Manchester United. I think this would probably imply more than just marginal gains, only because it's baffling to pundits, to myself, to everyone who's involved in football, that Manchester United don't have a sporting director as such. And it's actually, could you actually look at that as maybe a dereliction of duty in the last 10 to 15 years? Only because if you look at every single big club in world football, they've got this structure in place. You know, we always talk about Manchester City. I know this is a United podcast, but if you're comparing it to Manchester City, City seemed to have a plan to have Pep Guardiola come in 2 or 3 years before he even came into the club. And what they did, they built up that structure for when Pep Guardiola was to come in, so that everything was in place. And look what's happened. You've had this situation at Liverpool where Jurgen Klopp is working with a sporting director, and you hear stories sometimes where in the past, you know, Jurgen Klopp has chosen a player, but he's almost been overruled by the recruitment and the sporting department, because they've said, we agree he's a good player, but look at the stats and the data analysis. We think that this would be the better option. And they've gone for what's being perceived to be that better option. And in the past, they seem to have hit the jackpot more often than not, do Liverpool, when it comes to recruitment. Whereas United, it doesn't seem to have that structure. For the last 10 years since Sir Alex Ferguson and David Gill left the club, and I think that was really important that they left at the same time, which was a huge problem for United, because suddenly you've got a new era coming into United with David Moyes, who hasn't managed that higher level before, and Ed Woodward, who hasn't really done transfers before. And they're kind of just like trying to muddle through to see how are we going to recruit players. And, you know, that first summer was kind of like the start of where it all started to go wrong for United, because they waited until deadline day of David Moyes, a new manager. You know, they want to back him and show him, look, we're going to back you, we're going to give you money, we want you to recruit the players that you want. And it ends up being deadline day, and they sign Marouane Fellaini, having gone through the whole summer going through, are they going to sign Kroos, are they going to sign Gareth Bale? And it didn't happen. And then you got that situation where, because the sporting director's not there, effectively you lose and you don't get that identity and the philosophy of the club. And instead, you think that the way to get round it is how Sir Alex Ferguson ran the club, and that was the way to go for the future. But it's soon become evident that he was that one-off and the exception to the rule. And then you end up hiring managers from different backgrounds with different philosophies, who want different players, who want to spend hundreds of millions of pounds, to end up with a mishmash of a squad that United seem to have just now. And it's got to the point where even under Erik ten Hag, people have criticised Erik ten Hag for some of his signings. You could look at it another way. Why is Erik ten Hag making the signings? Because the recruitment hasn't been in place. So for me, this looks like the most important appointment United are going to make in the last 10 years since Sir Alex Ferguson left, because they haven't got that part right. And if they finally got somebody and an investment in the club, they're going to look at the football operations of the club, then surely that can only be a good thing, because it's almost going to be, let's take a step back. This needs to change. And so they're looking, and I think United fans will be pleased that they're looking at sporting directors. Dougie Friedman's been mentioned. Dan Ashworth has been mentioned. Paul Mitchell has been mentioned. And it's got to the point where it might not just be one, as you mentioned before. Could it be a team of recruitment and analysts and data providers and sporting directors who come into the club, whereby you take almost the pressure away from Erik ten Hag, if he is going to be the long-term manager at United, and you give the manager an input into what the recruitment will be, like the other big clubs will do. Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp and the other clubs that are up there, Mikel Arteta, they will have an input onto the players they want. Of course they will, because they're the ones that are going to have to coach them. But will they have the final say? No. That's what seems to have happened at United, because there's been a situation in the last 2 summers when they feel that they haven't backed Erik ten Hag and they haven't got the players that he wanted. And then towards the end of the window, particularly last summer, Anthony comes in for 80-90 million, who they could have got at the beginning of the window for half the price. Casemiro comes in on a 5-year contract as a 30-year-old for 70 million. It's unsustainable. And I think that is what the new the Ineos and the minority investment are going to have to look at first and foremost, because it's so easy to just say, oh, is the manager performing? Are the players performing? Above that is what they need to change first. Go top down instead of from bottom up. And I think that that's what Ineos will have to look at. And it's not going to be a quick fix. It can't be. And I think United fans will have to be patient with it.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I think, we've got pretty used to being patient over the last sort of decade. And the point you made there about, like, let's say Ten Hag isn't the guy who's going to win us the next title. When you look at City in particular, obviously they've had the last three managers have all won a title. Like Pep Guardiola walked into City and was stepping onto an escalator, a club that was already moving in a direction. Yeah. When a United manager arrives, they're stepping onto a static staircase, half of it's crumbling, there's a fire behind them that the old manager lit, and you have to sort of make your way up. Like, the difference is staggering, really, isn't it? United are just not set up to do the things that other teams are set up to do.
They need to build. There's a thing that they need to build, instead of, like, they get Champions League one season and then for a couple of seasons they don't get Champions League. Yeah. And they then think, to get back into the Champions League, we need to get the players to get us into the Champions League. Yeah. And a lot of players want to be in the Champions League straight away. So what United's, carrot is we can give you a long-term contract, however old you are, and we can pay you this much money. That's all well and good in the short term, but longer term, it's you can't do that. And so I think it's pleasing to see from a United standpoint that, they're starting youngsters like your Garnacho, like Kobe Mainu, and even though it hasn't worked quite as well as he would have liked with Rasmus Højlund just now, I think United fans will have seen enough to think, actually, there is something there. Yeah, he scored his first Premier League goal. He scored a few in the Champions League as well, but there is obviously something there. Can they build from the bottom? Can they find these younger players who are going to want to play for United? And maybe there will be a few bumps along the way. Maybe there won't be a Champions League qualification when United desperately need it. But that is the time when they've got to make sure not to panic, as opposed to, let's just spend another 200 million. I know they're 28, 29 years old, but we need to get back in the Champions League. Yeah. It's unsustainable.
Yeah, and we've done this thing, haven't we, where the Champions League, that line, that fourth place or maybe fifth going forward, but that fourth place line has almost been like the only thing that matters. So if you finish below that, you're sacked. And if you finish above that, we're happy and we don't need to invest and we don't need to improve the squad, because it's like that line is the only point that anyone cares about with the Glazers, of like, you finish above it, well done, get another season, we don't really need to invest. You can have Cavani, you can have Amad Diallo and Pellistri, because you're already good, you don't need top players. And then we finish below it, sack the manager, spend loads of money, and it's like, if we have the finish line being the winning the Premier League, then finishing fifth or sixth isn't just an immediate termination. It might be one step along a longer pathway to actually winning that top goal instead.
That's why, Joe, and I've said it before, that's why the sporting director and the recruitment team, it looks like it's the most important appointment for Ineos to sort out. It's easy to change your manager. It's easy. But it's very difficult to change 5 or 6 players who are on long-term contracts, who probably think, I don't need to go anywhere because I'm not going to earn as much elsewhere as I am here. I may not play, but I'm just going to pick up the money. The problem with that is going to be you can't get the identity of the club right then. No. That's where it's got to start. If it starts with the sporting director and the recruitment team, and you get the philosophy and the identity of the club back, and you get players who can play with that philosophy and that identity. If, for example, results don't work out and you think the manager's not working out, then you change the manager, but you bring in a manager who's going to work with the players, as opposed to the other way around. Because what's ended up happening with the last 5 or 6 managers is that they've complained about the previous manager's recruitment. I can't work with these players. I need 200 million. Here's that. Of course we can, because we want to back you. Yes, here's 200 million, buy your players. Doesn't work after 2.5 years. Next manager comes in, not sure about this squad, I need 200 million. And that has been the cycle that United can't seem to get out of. But it seems, from a United perspective, and you'd hope for a United fans perspective, that it will change, because they finally changed the football operations side of the football club, which had to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's strange. The next question is actually almost sort of dipping back into that sort of old school style of recruitment. But let's get into some ins and how United can basically push for top 4 and try and win the FA Cup, because that's the options remaining this season. Choupo-Moting, who does sort of smack slightly of Igalo and Cavani and transfers like that, has been linked with United. 17 goals, I think it was, for Bayern Munich last season. So not a hugely prolific player, but someone that's capable of putting the ball in the back of the net, given enough chances. United have been linked with him. How likely is that deal, or a deal for a striker in January?
So United have got their eyes open. Okay. They want to recruit in this window, particularly in the striking department. Now, some might not get excited about Eric Choupo-Moting because of all the reasons that you've just said. He has been offered to United. He's coming towards the end of his contract. It could be one of these low-risk deals that United could do until the end of the season. Yeah. While Ineos get their feet under the table, as I mentioned before, and look at the whole football operation, and then really start their recruitment in the summer. Yeah. With regard to Choupo-Moting, I think the other way to look at it is this, and that is the Rasmus Højlund situation. I don't think United's aim when he signed for the club was, there you go, you're going to shoulder the burden of responsibility for scoring goals at this football club. It's quite unfair to expect a 20-year-old who's had limited game time at his previous club in a different country, in a different league, to come to a club like Old Trafford without a pre-season, remember? Yeah. So he was injured when he turned up at the club. I'm sure United wanted to have a situation whereby they had an experienced striker in there as well. And then therefore, Højlund could come in off the bench. Yeah, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, and just ease himself in. But what has ended up happening, because of the form of United and because of the form of, for example, Rashford, who was scoring 30 goals last season and 3 goals so far this season, because he hasn't hit the ground running at all so far this season, is when as soon as Højlund is fit, straight into the team, go and score. Yeah. And I believe he's received a little bit of criticism that's unfair, but, I was listening to the commentary yesterday and, there was a little bit of criticism towards him. Oh, he's got to score this chance, he's got to score that chance. That may well be the case, but you need to take a step back, I think, with Højlund and just realize that the situation that he found himself in when he came, no pre-season for a player who's never played in the Premier League before. Yeah. It isn't going to be easy for him to do that. And if United can bring in an experienced striker in this January transfer window, whoever that may be, it just might take the burden off Rasmus Højlund. It might just allow him to be on the bench for a couple of games. And if United can get the players back that Erik ten Hag keeps talking about, your Casemiro, Mason Mount and others, I'm sure that's going to improve the supply line to players like Rasmus Højlund and an experienced striker. And you know what? It might be a situation if United can hit a patch of form whereby these players do come back and say, for example, they bring in an experienced striker. They haven't been in a position where, they've been 2-3-0 up in games and then they can bring Rasmus Højlund in off the bench for the last 20 minutes. Get yourself bedded in. It's just been go for it. So I think that might be one of the reasons they could be looking at an experienced striker rather than it being like a long-term solution to the striking issues there, which I think will be addressed more in the summer when the budget is available, because we keep talking about FFP and it is an issue for United as it is for a load of other clubs. Yeah.
Is there any other names in the sort of striking department? Like I said, United have been sort of offered, in quotes, Choupo-Moting. There's Guirassy is another one that was mentioned, but again, that seems like maybe we don't have the money for even 17 million euros, which isn't a hell of a lot with his release clause. Timo Werner was another one that was mentioned, and since we last spoke, looks like he's on his way to Tottenham. I think that's all but done, isn't it? So these sort of options seem to be narrowing down, and maybe it's just Choupo-Moting left.
Yeah, the Werner and the Choupo-Moting were the ones that were offered. Yeah. And I think United would look at the loan market, as I mentioned before, but also if there's a bargain. Now, it looks like the Guirassy one could be a cheap option because
Yeah.
his release clause is so low. But you've got to remember here as well, if you were to trigger that release clause, you'd be getting him on a permanent deal and signing him on a long-term contract. Now, all of that, it feels like would be addressed in the summer, because you've got to remember, he's late 20s now. He's 27 years old.
Yeah.
Is he someone that United would look at as a long-term solution to the striking problem, or would they rather just have a short-term option and then revisit everything in the summer?
Yeah.
That's the balancing act that United have got just now. And it has almost been forced upon them, this approach, because Ineos have come in. And I think in a way, short-term, it might not be what United fans want to hear, but I think United fans, the sensible ones anyway, will just say they need to sort this out.
Yeah.
And if it takes a summer, 2-3 windows, just going to have to just sit there and take it, only because it hasn't worked with the other methods that they've tried in the past.
Yeah, we've had sort of 20 windows since Sir Alex left, or whatever, 19, 18 windows that haven't amounted to, a hell of a lot. So another couple, as much as it might be painful, if you're moving in the right direction, I think people start to feel that momentum pretty quickly, don't they?
Yeah.
Just moving on then, obviously, United looking for a striker, Choupo-Moting an option, and we'll obviously see how that pans out over the next sort of couple of weeks. Going the other way is Jadon Sancho, potentially. And there seemed to be this sort of massive kind of snowball of news, and within almost sort of 24 hours, it went from Dortmund are looking at Sancho to, 3 million loan fee, United paying most of the wages, this is going to happen. And then all of a sudden, it's sort of pulled back again, and we're hearing, United want more than 3 million because it makes them look silly, and, Sancho might not. Like, what's the hold up there? Is that going to happen, Jadon Sancho to Dortmund?
It just seems to be dragging on a bit, only because when you get into a transfer window, it's actually only like been 4 or 5 days since the whole thing snowballed. So if you're looking at it, deals do take a little while, because contract situations and details in a contract, they're gone over with a really in great detail. So the information we have is that the loan part of the deal and how the wages will be apportioned, that has been agreed in principle. It's just the finer details of the contract that need to be signed off and resolved before this deal happens. Now, one part that I did say when I said how the salary will be apportioned, that would imply that Manchester United will be paying a portion of Jadon Sancho's wages, because Borussia Dortmund can't afford to pay the full wages. And it would also imply that, the Manchester United do want him out of the club if they're willing, for a £73 million asset that they bought, 2.5 seasons ago, to go back on loan and for them to pay part of those wages. So that's the situation at the moment. We still think it is a straight loan, and it will probably work for all parties, because there's no sign of a reconciliation, is there, between Jadon Sancho and Erik ten Hag just now. He's not playing. He hasn't played since August the 26th, has Jadon Sancho, so he'll need first team football. And significantly, the manager at Borussia Dortmund has been a big driver in this deal, Edin Terzic, because if you go back to the 2020-2021 season, that summer of 2020, United really pushed to sign Jadon Sancho, but they couldn't agree a deal, because at the time he still had 2 years left on his contract, and Dortmund was saying, we don't need to sell unless you give us 100 million euros plus. And so United didn't get the deal done then. And if you look at the first half of that season, Sancho did not play well.
Nope.
And it might have been a drop off and a follow on from the failed move to United, and Dortmund as a whole didn't play well. They changed their manager halfway through the season, and the interim manager for the rest of that season was Edin Terzic. And he got the best out of Jadon Sancho, because the second half of that season, he scored 13 goals in 23 appearances for Borussia Dortmund. He was on flames. And then he got the move to United that following summer. Dortmund changed their manager and got a permanent manager in the interim. But now Terzic is back in permanent charge of the team. And I think he has been a big driver in trying to bring Jadon Sancho back. And you would think Jadon Sancho is willing to go back to Dortmund, not only because he knows the club well, but he played under that manager in a very good fashion as well. And that could eventually work for United, because if you were to sell Jadon Sancho in this January transfer window, I don't know how much money you'd get, given he hasn't played for over 4 months. This is a calculated gamble that United are making. Send him away to somewhere he knows for 6 months. If he plays well, he comes back to United with 2 years left on his contract, plus the option of a further year, and his market value will go up. And if they are going to sell, then you've got a situation where they'll recoup some of that £73 million, or, as I said before, Ineos are looking at every single department in that football club. Is there a guarantee that Eric Ten Hag is going to be at the club next summer? That's a decision Ineos will make. And if he isn't, does Jadon Sancho have another opportunity to go again at Manchester United? There's all sorts of options that are available, which is the reason why I think this is probably the best deal all round. This is, if you compare this to what happened with Donny van de Beek a couple of seasons ago, it was my information before he went to Everton, United wanted to do a deal with a Spanish club because they felt that if he went on loan, on a straight loan to a Spanish club, the slower build-up in football, that it would be more conducive to the way Van der Beek played. He would actually play better in the Spanish league than if he was to stay in the Premier League. And those 6 months could have enhanced his transfer fee, because they felt that he would have played better there. What ended up happening, the deal, I think it might have been to Villarreal that they were trying to get him to, or another club. It didn't happen. He ended up going to Everton, and it didn't work out for him there. No. Now what's happened, he's gone to Eintracht Frankfurt, and the deal option price is going to be around about £11 million, which is, £25 million shy of the initial payment that United made.
Great. I think I heard at one point the transfer siren going off behind you there. So I'm going to assume that means that the Jadon Sancho deal is going to happen to Borussia Dortmund.
I'll check my phone. It's not come from my phone. It was actually an ambulance. So,
was it? Okay,
I guarantee we don't get too many of those here. So I don't live in that bad an area. So
well, we get them a lot around here, so don't worry about that. Just, I know we mentioned him before, Martial, but just sort of slightly more briefly, do you expect him to leave in January?
It's possible. Fenerbahce are trying to do a deal to sign Anthony Martial. The issue that they've got is if they want to do a permanent deal, the transfer fee could be prohibitive for Fenerbahce to do that deal. Right. Does that mean a loan move is ruled out? No. And while that would mean United would miss out on a transfer fee, it would actually take the wages off the books. And I know it's not a great win in inverted commas, but it would represent something for United, because, as I said before, they're not, as it stands, triggering that option on the current terms. And so there's every risk of losing Anthony Martial for no money at all. The other way to go is, do you extend his deal and still not sell him, and then pay him wages for another season, and he ends up going for free again? So I think what United are just trying to find the best solution here. The ideal scenario, I think, would be if they get a suitable offer on a permanent deal in this January transfer window, they would 100% consider it. If they don't, the loan move out of the club to take the wages off the books, or the majority of his wages off the books for the remainder of the season, that hasn't been ruled out either. But as it stands, it doesn't look like he's got too much of a longer term future at United.
Yeah. And just finally then, another name that's been mentioned, obviously, is just coming back from his suspension, is Ivan Toney. I know maybe January wouldn't be the right time because you're looking at a lot of money, and I think he's spoken about sort of repaying Brentford for their support and their sort of backing of him. But he's obviously a very talented player who's, again, is reaching that sort of mid to late 20s age where you think if he's ever going to go and play in the Champions League, this next sort of 6 to 12 months is probably going to be when he does it. A lot of links with transfers. United need a striker. Is that a name that United are interested in? And if not, why not? Because he seems like he ticks a lot of the boxes. What was it, 20 Premier League goals last season? He's obviously a very talented striker.
So for January, I think it would be impossible for United to do a deal for Ivan Toney at the money being quoted. Come the summer, I think there would be a lot of clubs who would be interested in him if he doesn't sign a new contract, which we don't expect him to do. The price simply because he'll only have 12 months left of his contract, you would think would come down slightly. Brentford, I don't know whether they could still command a £100 million transfer fee for someone who would be, 4 or 5 months away from signing a pre-contract agreement for no money at all with a foreign club, and then a further 6 months away from going anywhere he wanted for no money at all. So I think when Brentford would want to cash in would probably be the summer. And I think it'll probably be a wise decision for them, because if he does hit the ground running in January, then Brentford are in a little bit of a precarious position in the league just now. They're looking over their shoulder. If his goals kept them up, think about the money that comes with staying in the Premier League, and that would probably offset, or more than offset, the reduction in his transfer fee from January to the summer. With regard to Manchester United's interest, I think United will look at a number of strikers in the summer, but I think you've also got to look at the investment that they've made in Rasmus Højlund, in £72 million worth of investment in Rasmus Højlund. Is it going to curtail his progress at United if they're going to bring in a striker who might cost more than he did, and would be expecting to play week in, week out? What would then happen to Rasmus Højlund? Because he seems to be the long-term project for United. He seems to be the long-term investment for United, which is why I think if they do go into the market for a striker, it would be someone who would be more experienced, who would be able to help Rasmus Højlund out, rather than being a replacement for Rasmus Højlund. Because if you're going for Ivan Toney, peak years of his career now, 25, 26 years old, he'd expect to play if he moves for that much money. What then would happen with Rasmus?
That's a good point, a very good point. But one the United's going to have to deal with, isn't it? Because, there was talk last season of Harry Kane coming alongside Rasmus Højlund, and I think some reports suggested that Kane was relatively up for that. That would have been a situation to deal with, but then Kane is, I think Toney's 27, but will be 28 by the end of the season, and Kane is 30, 31, so there's a difference there, isn't there, in terms of expectation?
That's the big difference.
Yeah.
That's the big difference, because it would always have been 2 or 3 years, wouldn't it, where Harry Kane would be absolute number one choice, but you would still get that opportunity for Rasmus Højlund to play games, to come off the bench, to ease himself into his United career, which I'm sure Erik ten Hag would have wanted him to do, rather than what's happened so far. Yeah,
and also the other thing is you sign Ivan Toney on a 5-year deal. I know he's obviously 5, 6, 7 years older than Rasmus Højlund, but United haven't had a first choice striker stay at the club for 5 years. I mean, other than Martial, who hasn't been first choice, since Wayne Rooney. Yeah. So, you can sign players, but they usually come and go within those years anyway. So, it's going to be very difficult to see how United approach this. But hopefully, an experienced striker who can maybe get 7 or 8 goals between now and the end of the season and help Rasmus Højlund would be the perfect way to sort of navigate the January
just
transfer
very
window.
Quickly, I know there was a lot of criticism about Weghorst, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Last season, but he was still part of a squad and started a hell of a lot of games in a team that ended up finishing third and winning a trophy.
Yeah.
Getting to an FA Cup final, finishing in the quarterfinals of the Europa League. Goal scoring wise, we know the record was not good. Of course it wasn't good. And a big reason why they didn't exercise any kind of option or try and get Wout Weghorst to stay longer term. But the question you've got to ask, I suppose you've got to ask people who've been, who've played the game, can you actually carry a player for an entire 4 or 5 months and finish like you did? Matter of opinion.
Yeah, I do think he offered a lot that wasn't goal scoring, which again, eventually isn't enough. But like you said, he was part of a successful or relatively successful time at Manchester United. Anyway, that is going to be all from us. Thank you once again, Dharmesh, for coming on. Hopefully next week, I'm expecting Sancho's gone, Martial's gone. We've got a few quid to play with there. We've got Choupo-Moting in. We're looking at some centre back. I want things to explode into action, but maybe I'm just being optimistic and there's no real chance of that. But we'll be here to chat again, and you can give us all the latest updates on everything going on at Manchester United. Thank you once again, Dharmesh, for coming on. Very good to see you. We will see you very soon. Thank you for tuning in at home. This has been a one-on-one interview with Dharmesh Sheth of Sky Sports News. We'll see you in a bit.